Hello, and thanks for tuning in. This is Nick Slattery, Product Manager in the Cloud Provider Software Business Unit, and I'll be talking about vCloud Director App LaunchPad, which is a new product, version 1, being released in Q1 2020. I'll start out by talking about what App LaunchPad is and why we've built it and what the market context is for this. And then I'll show you a demo of the service provider and tenant experience in vCloud Director. And for the more technical folks, I'll then go through the architecture of App LaunchPad and how it works with vCloud Director. I'll start out by talking about why we built App LaunchPad. And essentially what we are trying to do is appeal to developer users. And we want to do this through building modern tooling and a modern experience for consuming applications on vCloud Director. We also want to offer our service provider partners a fast path to monetization, so make it easy for them to build new services and go to market with new services, and then elevate their vCloud Director environments from just infrastructure services to a more application focus. So offering an application service on vCloud Director. And we're doing this because the decision-making power for IT spend is shifting from the IT admin role and more towards the developer roles. So even if a developer does not have final say in where IT spend goes, they at least have significant influence. So it's important for our service providers to be able to appeal to developer personas in their end customers to grow their vCloud Director business. So how we are addressing this is through a work stream called Developer Ready Cloud. And this comprises 3 components, being application services, developer experience, and modernized infrastructure. So in application services, this is the actual service that a developer would want to consume. And we're addressing this through our Bitnami acquisition from last year and providing the Bitnami catalog of applications on vCloud Director. And how a developer would experience this, so how they would actually consume Bitnami applications on vCloud Director, is through App LaunchPad, as well as things like our Terraform provider and SDKs. And then on the infrastructure side, we're working on integrating containers into vCloud Director. So I'm not talking about that today, but that includes container service extension, as well as our integrations with the Tanzu portfolio and Project Pacific. So just to give a refresh on what Bitnami is and what they offer, Bitnami package open source applications as pre-configured and tested out-of-the-box applications that are ready to be consumed. So this means that dev teams don't need to go looking for open source components and configuring it themselves. So it saves a lot of upfront time as well as maintenance over the life cycle of that application. And they offer over 180 applications now, both virtual machines and containers. They have well over 1,000 releases per month. And most importantly, on that top right, that number, 1.5 billion compute hours per year driven by Bitnami applications. So the takeaway here is that Bitnami drives consumption of the underlying compute platform. So what we are trying to do is take the power of Bitnami and their appeal in the developer community and take that value to vCloud Director service providers. And how we are doing that is through this workflow. So without App LaunchPad, this is the workflow that would exist today. So firstly, on the top left, a cloud provider would go to cloud.vmware.com, which takes them to the Cloud Provider Hub. And if they have signed a Bitnami commit contract, they could then go to the Cloud Marketplace service where all of the Bitnami applications would be shown to them. Now, Marketplace has integrated with vCloud Director as an endpoint, so they could push applications from Cloud Marketplace into vCloud Director as vApp templates. So they would select the catalog to push to, and then the application would exist in that catalog in vCloud Director as a vApp template. The provider could then share that catalog with their tenants, and then the tenant could consume that catalog item, that application, through vCloud Director catalogs or the API. But what we are introducing now is App LaunchPad, which would become the new way for a tenant to interact with the applications that have been published to them in vCloud Director. So what it would look like for the tenant is something like what you see on the right-hand side in that image. They would log into vCloud Director, access the App LaunchPad plugin, and they would see all of the applications that are available to them as tiles. So what it is a curated catalog of applications for vCloud Director tenants, and it's completely curated by the service provider. And what that means is the service provider can choose which applications to show to which tenants. And they could be Bitnami applications, and we have optimized for Bitnami use cases, and I'll talk about what that means shortly. It could also be ISV apps from the cloud marketplace or in-house applications. And an in-house application could be any app that can exist as a VApp template that the service provider wishes to offer. We also wanted to provide a really easy way of deploying these applications to vCloud Director. And so that's this one-click app deployment goal we had is, for example, if I'm a WordPress developer and I have not used vCloud Director before, I want to be able to consume WordPress on vCloud Director without really understanding how vCloud Director works. So not having any knowledge of the underlying infrastructure and still be able to provision my application and access it. So what we've done is given the service provider the ability to configure the default way that an application would be provisioned, and thereby saying the tenant does not need to specify how a VApp is launched from a VApp template. So for example, App LaunchPad can automate VM creation. They can assign the VM to a network, configure firewall rules, and assign an IP address. So the tenant does not have to do that themselves. So what is the value proposition of App LaunchPad? So there's the tenant value and the provider value. On the tenant side, it's around decreasing the time to market and decreasing operational overhead. And this is really what the Bitnami portfolio of applications provides. They provide out-of-the-box applications, and with App LaunchPad, we provide a way to consume those applications easily. And then on the overhead side, what we are doing is enabling developers to self-service, so they don't need to go through IT operations to provision a new application. And they also do not need to necessarily understand the underlying infrastructure to begin working. For service providers, we are enabling them to target a new persona, being developers. And developers want out-of-the-box applications, and we want to enable our service providers to offer those applications on vCloud Director and elevate their positioning in the market from an infrastructure provider to an application platform provider. And this application platform can be, as I said, fully curated by the service provider, and this allows them to differentiate. So they could specify applications for a particular vertical or a particular job function, for example. They could also use App LaunchPad to add value to their existing services. So if they're already using VCD catalogs, they could use App LaunchPad to provide a modern user experience for catalogs. So in terms of use cases, a service provider would use App LaunchPad to curate a portfolio of applications, which they would then offer as services to their customers. And as I mentioned, this portfolio could consist of Bitnami apps, any app from the cloud marketplace, or any in-house app that can exist as a VApp template. And then the developer would access App LaunchPad to consume those applications and launch them to vCloud Director. What it looks like is something like this. So if I logged in as a provider admin, I would see this left-hand image, an overview of how all of my tenants are consuming applications through App LaunchPad. And on the right-hand side, if I log in as a tenant, I would just see a marketplace style user interface showing all the applications that the service provider has given me access to. So now I'm going to jump into a demo, and we'll see what the experience is like for both the tenant and the service provider. So I'm now logged into vCloud Director as an org admin. And I could be actually any role in vCloud Director. I could be a vApp user and it would still work the same way. But I could go to the hamburger menu and select the App LaunchPad plugin. And I would be taken to the screen we saw in the slides earlier, which shows all of the applications that I have access to. And as you can see, there are some featured applications at the top that are set by the service provider, but we're going to try and launch a LAMP application. So this is the Bitnami LAMP stack VM image. And you can see the description there is taken from the cloud marketplace metadata. So we're recreating that marketplace look and feel. But all we need to do is name that application and then click launch. And that will be created in vCloud Director. And we can see in the taskbar that that is in the process of being created now. So you can see that App LaunchPad took care of all of the infrastructure provisioning, all of the attaching it to a network, and everything that would usually be done in the vApp creation process. Now, if we look at what App LaunchPad is actually doing, we can see in the details page, all of the metadata from the cloud marketplace has been added here as part of the tile in App LaunchPad. And if we go and try and launch that application again, but this time instead of clicking launch, we're going to click on that show details dropdown so we can see what App LaunchPad is actually doing. So if we wanted, we could change the VDC that we deploy into. We could change the size of the application. So this is the size of the VM that gets deployed. We can select different configurations of CPU, RAM, storage. We can check what the IP assignment will be. So we can choose between internal IP address and external IP address. External would be a direct network or a routed network attached to an NSX edge with NAT rules configured. We can also select some more advanced settings like which network to attach to, which storage profile to use, and we can add a startup script and metadata tags if we wish. But we're not going to launch that application now. We're going to go back into the My Applications tab, which shows all of the apps that we've previously deployed. And we can see that the demo LAMP image is running now. So that's successfully launched, and you can see it's been assigned an IP address. So we can access it there, and we can open the console and we can perform a few actions on it, such as power the VM off or view it in vCloud Director. But we're going to click Open Console, and we'll see that the Bitnami LAMP image successfully installed and is running. So we can see that the Bitnami logo is there, and that's ready to be used. So that's just a very fast way to get from nothing to a running virtual machine with software installed that's ready to be consumed by a developer. So we can also jump back into your vCloud Director view if we want more advanced configuration. All of the running apps in App LaunchPad exist on the back end as vApps. And now we've changed to a system admin view. So App LaunchPad will detect that we've logged in as a system admin, and it will present us with a different view, which shows an overview of how all of my tenants are using App LaunchPad. So you can see that we have 2 organizations in this vCloud Director environment that's using App LaunchPad. You can see they've used 5 different applications, and they currently have 13 total running instances of those 5 different applications. So if we click into Access Management, we can see a list of all the organizations in our VCD environment. We can see if they have access to App LaunchPad and how they're using it. So number of catalogs of applications they have access to, and the number of running instances. If we click into an organization, we can see an overview of how they're using App LaunchPad. Then if we click into deployment settings, we can set the defaults for how an application would be launched for each tenant. So if we select Acme as an organization, they have 3 VDCs, we can select Boston as their default VDC. And then for each VDC, we can select the default settings for how an application would be deployed. So this way, the end user does not need to enter any infrastructure specific information. And this is how we get that experience of just naming the application and then clicking launch. So all of the settings you saw on the launch page earlier can be configured in that deployment settings page. Then if we click over into applications, we'll see a list of all the apps that we've added to App LaunchPad. So you can see that we've added the Bitnami beta catalog, and you can see all the applications within that catalog. If we click into LAMP, we can see that one organization, Acme, is using this application. So that's the app that we just deployed previously. Then we're going to click into the settings tab. And this is just global settings, things like sizing templates. So when we saw the tiles of the VM sizing in the launch page, this is a global setting. It's the same for all users and all applications. And the service provider can configure these sizes here. So they just select CPU count, memory, and storage. They can also select the featured applications. So this is that top row of applications. So they're pinned to the top. So if a service provider wants to market a specific application, for example, they could pin it to the top for all of their users. So that's the demo of App LaunchPad. And now I'm going to switch back into an architecture discussion. So we just saw a demo of App LaunchPad for the service provider and the tenant views. And now I'm going to show exactly how we deliver that experience. But before we get into this and before the non-technical folks drop off, I'll just say that App LaunchPad will be available through My VMware, so as a download through My VMware for all partners, and it is a free plugin for vCloud Director. So this will be available in Q1 for all of our service provider partners. So now this last section is really just for the more technical people, and I'm going to walk through a managed services diagram. So this is for version 1.0 of App LaunchPad, and it should be noted that we are supporting single virtual machine applications for version 1. So this means VApps with a single virtual machine in them, and this covers most use cases, covers all of the Bitnami use case, most of the ISV apps in the cloud marketplace, and many in-house applications as well. So we wanted to get that right, and then I'll look at, before we wrap up the call, what's on the roadmap for the second and third releases. So here we have on the bottom left, this first point, the service provider admin. And what they do is manage the vCloud Director platform. And at step 2, they manage App LaunchPad and the tenant access to App LaunchPad. So they go through that service provider view that we showed earlier of creating catalogs, publishing catalogs to their tenants, and setting default deployment settings, things like that. Thirdly, if the provider has access to the cloud marketplace and the Bitnami community catalog of applications, they could populate App LaunchPad with the VM applications from the cloud marketplace. So they go into cloud marketplace and push applications to App LaunchPad. So the next step would be the tenant admin. Their role doesn't change from a typical vCloud Director setup. The tenant admin just manages the tenant's org VDCs. The tenant developer would use App LaunchPad to deploy VMs to their VDCs. So they're really the 5 steps that all 3 personas would go through to complete the workflow. But you can see there is a step 6 there in the middle. App LaunchPad's service role manages tenant vCloud Director resources. And that's an important point that we'll dive into shortly. The other thing that I want to call out is the App LaunchPad org on the right-hand side of the diagram. So when the service provider installs App LaunchPad for the first time, they will also create an organization for App LaunchPad. And within that, they will create an org VDC for App LaunchPad. And that is where all of the catalogs that are shown in App LaunchPad will reside. So all of the VCD catalogs that have applications to be shown in App LaunchPad will exist in the App LaunchPad org VDC. And this is how we have a single catalog that can be published to all of the service providers' tenants in vCloud Director. So I'm going to now talk about more about that App LaunchPad org, as well as the service role that I just mentioned. And then I'll talk about generally how App LaunchPad constructs map to vCloud Director constructs. So that provider organization, so the App LaunchPad organization, is created by the system through an onboarding procedure. So the first time that a service provider logs in, they'll be taken through a step-by-step guide on how to get up and running with App LaunchPad. And this is an organization that will be named App LaunchPad. There will be a paygo type org VDC within that organization called ALP. And this will be used to basically host the disk space for all of the catalogs that will be shown in App LaunchPad. So within that VDC, as I said, the provider would create catalogs of applications and publish them to their tenants. Some customers, for example, users that would be a VApp user or potentially a VApp author, may not have the required permissions to do everything that App LaunchPad needs to do to deliver that experience that we just looked at. So what we do is have a service account on the back end that has all the required permissions. And this is the account that we use to actually manage vCloud Director resources. So if I'm a VApp user and I don't have the required permissions to use App LaunchPad, I can still get the same experience with App LaunchPad because of this service account on the back end. So it's actually the service account that is reading the templates from the App LaunchPad organization and provisioning them as new VApps in the customer's tenancy. Now, if we look at the App LaunchPad constructs side by side with vCloud Director constructs, in App LaunchPad, we did not want to use vCloud Director jargon because remember, we're optimizing for a user that perhaps does not have prior experience with vCloud Director. Let's say they're a WordPress developer or a LAMP developer, and they're not particularly familiar with vCloud Director. So we tried to avoid using VCD jargon. So in App LaunchPad, we have app catalogs. So catalog, same name as in vCloud Director. And we might have a catalog called Bitnami in App LaunchPad. And from the App LaunchPad UI as a service provider, I can publish the Bitnami catalog to a tenant so that they would then see it in App LaunchPad. And what that is doing on the VCD side is just taking that same catalog and publishing it to a tenant. So that part of the workflow is pretty much the same. Then when we get to the tenant side, we have tenant Acme. So if we log into Acme, and what we would see is the marketplace of applications that we have access to. So in App LaunchPad, the end user would not see the catalogs that the applications exist in. They would just see the applications. Whereas on the VCD side, obviously those applications exist as catalog items within a catalog, and those catalog items are, of course, the app templates. So we've tried to remove the construct of catalogs from the end user experience, and we've removed the notion of VApps and VApp templates. So we don't use that jargon on the end user side. So from an end user, they just see a marketplace of all their applications, and then they would launch those applications, which in VCD, the jargon is deploy. So similar jargon there. From there, in App LaunchPad, the end user could go to the My Applications tab, which shows all of the applications, like we saw earlier, that they have deployed using App LaunchPad. And this would show really just some high-level details of that application. So they could access the console, they could see the IP address, they could see that the application is running, and they could perform basic actions like power it off. But if they want to perform further actions, they could go into vCloud Director, where the same application exists as a running VApp, and they could perform further management within VCD. So this is how the workflows within App LaunchPad map to vCloud Director. This is how App LaunchPad is actually built. You can see up the top left here is the App LaunchPad UI plugin. And this is what serves the user interface for the tenants and the provider admin. So this is the user interfaces that we saw earlier. And on the back end, there's a Java backend, and this is what is actually responsible for managing the vCloud Director resources. So when we come through the UI and we go through that launching an application process, it's actually the Java backend through the RabbitMQ message broker that is launching those applications as vApps into vCloud Director. Now, if the service provider has access to the cloud marketplace, that would be another service which they could use to push applications directly into vCloud Director. And if they push them into a catalog within the App LaunchPad organization, then those applications from the cloud marketplace could be shown in the App LaunchPad user interface. So speaking of marketplace, this is that workflow that I just described. Service provider could log into cloud marketplace. The process within the cloud marketplace is to subscribe to applications, and they could select vCloud Director as the platform. And then they would push applications from cloud marketplace into VCD. Then on the VCD side, the provider would log into App LaunchPad and publish the catalog that they've pushed applications to. They would publish it to their tenants, and then those applications in the catalog will be surfaced in the App LaunchPad user interface. So the process for adding Bitnami applications is the same as for all ISV apps actually, but we've optimized version 1 of App LaunchPad to work with Bitnami. And what we do is take the logos and descriptions for Bitnami applications and automatically add them as metadata to the VApp templates when they're pushed into vCloud Director. So what this means is that the marketplace look and feel is retained in App LaunchPad. So the end user will still see the logos and descriptions and all of the metadata that comes with those applications in App LaunchPad. Now, for in-house applications, we do support service providers adding their own in-house applications as well, but it doesn't come with the out-of-the-box logos and descriptions. So the process for adding an in-house application is that the provider would create a new catalog in the App LaunchPad organization. So this has to be separate catalogs to any catalogs that the marketplace is pushing to, and they would import their VApp templates into these catalogs. Then the provider could make calls to the VCD API to set logos, friendly names, and descriptions and summaries on their applications. Now we will be publishing some sort of documentation, which may take the form of a white paper or a blog, which would walk through this process of how to take in-house applications and give them that marketplace look and feel. Then it's the same process for Bitnami applications in terms of publishing those catalogs to the provider's tenants. So that's the architecture and generally how it's built and how App LaunchPad interacts with vCloud Director. Now just briefly looking at the roadmap. So we've talked about version 1 of App LaunchPad, which is going GA Q1 2020, and that supports single VM applications. So this includes all of the Bitnami VM images and most images that our service providers are offering today to their tenants. So version 1 is just the UI interfaces that we've walked through today, supporting service providers offering a portfolio of applications and tenants launching single VM applications through one-click app deployment. And on the service provider side, being able to set default settings for the infrastructure configuration, and then on the tenant side, being able to customize during the launch process. And then for service providers, lastly, tracking consumption of applications through App LaunchPad. We have a few API calls that are supported, and they're all related to tracking consumption. And the service provider has that homepage dashboard where they can see their customers' utilization through App LaunchPad. We also support vCloud Director 9.7 to 10.1. Then if we look to the future, obviously these things are all subject to change as we get through the development process. But the theme for version 2 of App LaunchPad, or release 2 rather, is containers. So that would be support for deploying container applications to existing Kubernetes clusters through the App LaunchPad user interface. So we want to have VM applications and container applications within the App LaunchPad experience. As well as that, tighter integration with the cloud marketplace and supporting a public API for all of the provider and tenant functions. Then when we look further to the future, we are looking at path integration. So you may know about the project path work that the CPSBU has been working on, and App LaunchPad will become part of the overall path story as well. So that's how we deliver this application experience in vCloud Director, from why we're doing it to what it is to how exactly it is built. And then we've gone through the roadmap as well. And as I said earlier, this will be available as a no-cost download through a service provider's My VMware portal. So thank you for tuning in.